Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this workshop on open source program offices, OSPOs for short, in the public sector. So this is our focus, public sector OSPOs. My name is Monika Sowińska. I work for the European Commission Directorate General for Digital Services in the Interoperability and Digital Government Unit. And one of my responsibilities is OSOR, the Open Source Observatory. So the team is behind of this workshop today. I collaborate very closely with the Commission Open Source Program Office, and effectively I act as a member of it. And today also you will hear from my colleagues. Let me also introduce the team behind today's workshop. We have the OSO members with us, consultants from Wavestone, the company that supports the Commission in making sure that OSOR remains interesting and relevant to your needs. The three OSO members facilitating today's workshops are Clare Dillon, Cindy Brandon Roche, and Edwige Malville. Today we are going to hear from our great speakers, 4 great speakers, who will share their extensive knowledge on OSPOs based either on research or hands-on experience. We will then discuss various aspects of running an OSPO in a public organization, as well as the role of OSPOs in transforming public services. We will begin with Johan Linåker's presentations of the findings of the study on public sector OSPOs. Johan, a senior researcher at RISE, conducted this study some time ago, and it's yet to be published. The Commission intends to publish it in the coming weeks. There is a big delay. There were some problems, but we are overcoming them, and it should really happen in the coming weeks. Today, Johan will talk about the different archetypes of OSPOs and how they help to grow institutional capabilities. Following this overview that will serve as a background for the following presentations, we will hear 3 presentations from seasoned practitioners talking about their experience with OSPOs. As no 2 OSPOs are the same, but they of course share a lot commonalities. So our 3 practitioners that will be sharing their experience today are first Miguel Diez Blanco from the European Commission and team lead of the Interoperability Enablers and Open Source team. Then Boris van Hoytema, who leads the Open Source Program Office at the Dutch Ministry of the Interior and Kingdom Relations. And last but not least, Clare Dillon, PhD researcher and community lead of CURIOSS. So if you are curious what is CURIOSS, it's Community for University and Research Institution Open Source Program Offices. This will be followed by a panel discussion, and in which I hope you will all engage. But before we move on that, let me fulfill my duty and say a few words about the observatory for those who haven't met us yet, although I see a lot of familiar names and faces, but there are some newcomers. So just really a few words. The best is just to go to OSOR. So I would like to ask my team to put a link. So the Commission Open Source Observatory has been serving public sector organizations for more than 16 years already, helping them embrace open source by sharing knowledge, best practices. We have been driving open source in a way for open, innovative, and interoperable Europe public sector since 2008. So that's why I said more than 16 years. We achieved this by publishing of a variety of resources, such as case studies, reports on open source policies and initiatives, studies on topics pertinent to open source communities. We provide information on open source, transparent and collaborative software solutions. We also provide regular news updates on recent developments in open source within the public sector. Then you can have access to them also through the newsletter that we send out every month, and you are encouraged to subscribe. And we organize events for the open source community, like this one. We hope that the OSOR community will become active in the newly established Interoperable Europe community. And you are welcome to register with this community. I will share the link later on. This is not the topic of this webinar, but it's something that you should really look at because Interoperable Europe community will have a huge role in actually making open source happen in the public sector. And as I said, this is not the topic for today. The best is just to go there. I will share a link in the moment and register formally, because this is a formal community that has some formal role established by the Interoperable Europe Act. Here you see it's listed what you can find in OSOR, some figures to actually raise your appetite. So until today, we published more than 2,500 news, over 120 case studies on the deployment of open source with public administrations, various guidelines, and country reports on policies and initiatives, open source policies and initiatives in 51 countries. It's a really very good overview. And much more to be found on OSOR. So I will stop here because we would like to use as much as possible time for really, really fantastic presentations that our speakers prepared for you today. So let's start with Johan. Johan is a senior researcher at RISE, the National Research Institute of Sweden, and adjunct assistant professor at Lund University. He has been researching and supporting public sector and industry in open source adoption and collaboration for more than 10 years. I think he also has some other very interesting roles, but he's very modest, and he put his introduction to what I just said, but there are a lot of great things going on now in open source world in public sector, and maybe Johan will share it with us during his presentation. Johan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And yes, I'm Swedish, so we're modest by nature. Okay, I'll just share my full screen, typically the safest. Can you see my presentation slides now?
Yes, we can.
Yes, awesome, cool. Thanks for the introduction. So yes, my name is Johan, and I'm going to present a study we did together with Open Forum Europe within the OSOR project for Digit and a commission. And so the basic outlet here was, what is open source program offices, specifically in the public sector? So this thing came from the West Coast industries in the US in the beginning of the 2000s. Basically, it's a center of competency for organizations in order to support their open source operations, enable the use, creation, release, collaboration, engaging, and growing an open culture within organizations. You could define it as a type of a change agent, and which I will return to later in the public sector, a policy enabler, as I call it. It helps to provide input, but also helps to execute on an organization's open source strategy, or leverage open source as a tool to achieve the business and policy goals of the organization. So in the public sector, through my research, there are several challenges, of course, but three main challenges typically stand out. The limited knowledge about what open source implies, how you can go about using, adopting, collaborating, sharing, how this cultural resistance about being stuck in a risk risk-averse culture, conservative procurement culture, a sense of or state of comfort. I typically talk about not being susceptible to change, and then of course with limited resources, and this is especially apparent on the municipal level, where there aren't the resources or capabilities and knowledge to know what open source is or how to consider it. So this is where the need for creating these champions, these boundary spanners, these centers of competency that can help provide the resources necessary to help the organizations evolve, both from this, like, okay, what is open source? Okay, we're using it, and then starting to realize, okay, there are licenses. Okay, but if we start contributing, we can get some value out of this. How can we start using open source more strategically to, like, as a tool in our digital transformation? How can we make digital public services more transparent, more open? How can we make it more cost effective by not having to buy the same thing 219 times? If we do go this about, we can ease in our dependence on certain types of vendors, and make things more interoperable. But there's a lot of different things here. So it starts out with what are the policy goals, and then comes the strategy for how to achieve those goals. And here open source provides a tool, and the OSPO, the public sector OSPO, provides um, the, the, the the knowledge and the change agent for growing the culture, knowing how to leverage this tool to achieve your goals. So we went about with the question, how are OSPOs organized and structured in the public sector? In the private sector, there's no one answer. It's a change agent. Everything will depend on the organization, its current culture, its missions, its structure, how it's if it's a matrix format or if it's international and so on. It's you can't provide one recipe, but we could identify various blueprints or archetypes that can help inform others within the public sector to take point from and learn from. So in total, we identified 6 of these different archetypes that I will present here today with some examples. So on the top level, on the national government level, these OSPOs are typically located within the national administration of ministries with some form of responsibility for digital government or general transformation, with the primary goal of scaling the national capacity, supporting not just their own agency or administration, but society at large. And we saw examples both in France, Italy, Germany, and Luxembourg. But since these have continued to start popping up and also evolving. For example, we've seen the Center of Digital Sovereignty in Germany really accelerating in the past year, which I can return to. But just as a case study for this presentation, I think I saw Leo in the audience as well, so he can criticize me or validate what I'm telling you. But in Italy, they have this history with this law that came about in 2012 saying that we should do open source first, and we should release things as open source. But it didn't really have any effect up until 2019, about when they actually started providing the guidance needed, the procurement guidelines for how to actually evaluate total cost of ownership, or how to compare apples and oranges in terms of security, maintainability, usefulness, needs for support. And this is what this OSPO that evolved from a cross-organizational project called Developers Italia, that helped build these resources and capabilities, and also facilitating a large wide-spanning community across both civil society, public sector, and industry, highlighting or bringing in hackers, activists, subject matter experts, from all across society, helping to sustain and grow the open source capabilities in Italy. It's called Developers Italia. There's also Designers Italia, and that's really driving this change and very inspirational. And looking at, for example, France, they have something similar called the Blue Hats, also grow organically, now also aiming to grow internationally. So and if we look at cross compare, like for example, Italy and Germany and France, we're seeing much the same things here, like growing the guidelines, the catalogs for open source, public sector open source projects, resources for how to interpret what licenses are, trying to grow resources that can scale, because these OSPOs are typically limited in resources, as most parts of public sector. So they're trying to do what's best in order to scale the support as much as possible with the limited resource they have at hand. And then maybe looking at the more institution organization-centric OSPOs, which are much more similar to what you would find in industry, typically located within internal departments responsible for IT, focused on scaling the open source capabilities within the organization. So here we looked at the EC OSPO, the Public Employment Service in Italy, and the Bureau or the Dutch Tax and Customs Administration. So here we are repeating and maybe or saying what we will hear maybe later on in today's session, but I think it's still good to maybe take a look at the European OSPO from the study perspective. So again, it resides in Digit, and it helps to execute and facilitate on the open source strategy, and provides this liaison between both the different departments within the commission, but also towards the external community. And something I'd really like to highlight is this role that this commission OSPO has taken on in facilitating and convening the larger ecosystem of OSPOs. It really highlights the need to work together, building common capabilities that I will iterate. And they promote consumption and contribution through various processes relating to compliance and security, something that we see across organizations in the industry, quite mature, and also in the Tax and Administrations Bureau and Employment Service that we also looked at, that they develop these processes to help guide internal developers for how to go about when looking at open source. And then going down to the local government level, and this is not as common. This is typically limited to those that have the resources necessary, which is not that many. But again, typically located within these cases within the departments responsible for IT services. And while they are focused on the local government, within the local government borders, there, at least in the cases that we have looked at, which have been quite mature, they have also recognized the need to work together and support or gain the support and collaborate with other municipalities within the respective countries. So looked at the city of France, the city of Bratislava, and the city of Ventspils, the third largest city in Latvia. And looking at the city of Latvia, so they don't have an explicit open source strategy. Much more what I would expect and would propose to that open source is considered as a tool and brought into existing strategies, be it for digital transformation or the labor market or whatever. There isn't always a need for an explicit open source strategy. Rather, consider open source as a tool here and bring it in and illustrate how it can be used to achieve your goals in a sense. So, but that will differ from organization to organization. Open source here is the preferred way of going about within the city, but not by default. There needs to be a strong business case, so they are not like going open initially. There needs to be some kind of motivation behind it, which I think is good. Open source is not always the way forward, and there needs to be a case for it. And they develop and maintain various open-based services, but also working on developing an e-service platform for the city, but also working to scale that across the country. And then maybe also staying at the municipal level, and here comes about how we can work together with these association-based OSPOs or open source stewards or foundations, however we choose to call them, but typically with an association form where the different typically municipalities, but it can also be other types of public organizations. They come about. They share resources. They join in, pool the resources, and help fund, collaborate, grow common open source projects. We looked at Denmark, the Netherlands, the Czech Republic, but there's also these examples like in France and Sweden. So this form of coming together and collaborating, sharing resources is becoming more and more common, and I think a important way forward if we want to achieve something here on a national scale. And we looked in this example, we look specifically at Czech Republic and Open Cities. They receive and host open source projects initiated by public entities. And here there are other versions, like looking at OS2 in Denmark, for example. I saw Rasmus in the audience as well. They typically initiate projects through their members. They bring together members, and where there's a common interest, they go about start something, start maturing it, co-pooling, co-funding the development, acquiring a vendor, and so on. And in the Dutch case of VNG, that their main project, the Signalen project, came about from the city of Amsterdam, and then grew out of that space, needed somewhere to evolve further, and then moving into the VNG as a first case, seeing how they can go about growing that. And the Open Cities at the time hosted 6 projects, including one of the bigger ones, and they also were working with the wider communities, as we saw, for example, in Italy and France. And then we also saw in the academic cases that there are open source program offices, maybe more of an open science flavor, not just looking at open source software, but also open data, open knowledge, open access. So it really depends on the scope of the institution. Looking at Lero, they had a quite informal team, internal community of subject matter experts, while looking at the Trinity College Dublin, for example, that was more located to the technology transfer office, supporting how you could translate or make a business model or spin out your results as open source freewares and ways. And we're also seeing a rapid growth of these academic OSPOs, especially in the US, due to a special source of funding from the Sloan Foundation. And then there are some common challenges here. Organizational support for open source lacking. And then complementary support functions. So here we looked at the civil society, but in the case of Code for Romania, which has this special role here promoting and supporting the public sector, launched in 2016, and really helping the where the government doesn't prioritize. They have another focus, and then on in terms of spending, so they really take on this role and support, helping them to equip with the various open source tools, working very close, identifying the needs, the challenges of society at large, and then going about identifying existing projects or creating new ones, but typically going about finding new ones or existing ones, like council democracy, for example, and bringing that in and helping the municipalities to adopt it and take it on long term. So more like they provide like an incubator on onboarding ramp for municipalities to adopt new services. So which archetype should you choose? Well, again, these are examples, generalizations. So it really depends on where you are located and what your needs are and so about. So, but consider them as blueprints that you can take inspiration from and combine. But you need to recognize this need of not staying isolated. It's a need to become open. It's a need to become interoperable as an organization, not just looking at the technology. You need to grow stronger together. And this was the good thing we found this in the study. There is a will and need for support, and the more capable are really doing their thing and helping others grow, because together you grow stronger. And here the association-based OSPOs really provide a prime example. And also interesting to see how these various communities in France, Italy, Czech Republic help this transformation, and what role the civil society can play and other parts of society can play in supporting governments in this. So it's really about bridging and growing common communities and capabilities, both in the public, academia, civil society, and the private. And also thinking that open source has no borders. There isn't something called Swedish open source, the European open source. Open source has no boundaries. So it's both considering the international level, the national level, the local level. How can we all collaborate? That's the thing, and that's what the OSPO can help an organization to achieve, a mindset about, a culture about, the tools and processes needed to collaborate cross-border and cross institutions. So looking forward, OSPOs will continue to be a change agent and a policy enabler. As I talked about, you can't just define a policy and then expect it to fall into place and achieve whatever things you want. You need the right tools and understanding of how to leverage those tools, and define what you want to achieve, and then a OSPO can be a way on that path. So the OSPO will continue to play this important role, and open source in this mind will, with time, and already today, as we see, for example, in academia, it's not just open source. In the public sector, it's a lot more focused, typically on open data in many cases, and open standards. It's about open strategic autonomy. It's about promoting interoperability. So open source here needs to be widened in the context here. So I think that's also an important thing to send into the discussions. And I think I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Johan. So can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
There's some breaks, so I wasn't sure. So thanks a lot. As I said, the study will be published in the coming weeks. There is much more in that, of course. This was really like touching the surface and presenting only some of case studies that was done in the preparation for the study, and more information about archetypes, all the findings. So please follow us, subscribe to the newsletter, because as soon as it's published, this will be probably the news in our newsletter. Now it's time for you to ask questions to Johan. We allocated some time. I just wanted also to remind you that we will have a panel session and panel discussion after all the presentations, where you will also have a chance to contribute, to ask questions. But now, if anything really hot comes to your mind, you need to ask now, please do it. Are you keeping your questions for the next session?
Maybe yes. In any case, there was nothing in the chat. Yes. Okay, go ahead, Luis.
Yes. Hello. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. Just one quick question. You said that open source does not have boundaries. First question is, what does that imply in terms of strategy? And second question is more remark. I would say that open source has boundaries. I mean, the license and the way the product itself flows has no boundaries. I agree with that. But open source is by essence very political. And I feel like there are some boundaries. Chinese open source is not going to be the same as European open source, and United States open source is not going to be the same as European open source. I'm basing that on a report, Alice Panier. I don't know if you've read it. I don't remember the title of it. It's like geopolitization of open source. So yeah, that's my question.
So this can be a very broad discussion, but I'll try to keep it short. Basically, it's an open source project is what the community defines it as. There is a license that says how it can be reused and shared. That enables a form of open collaboration, a development model, and then that collaboration model that can span whatever organization or whatever boundary, geographical boundary, cultural boundary. Depending on what you want to achieve, that collaboration will look different. So if a European company or some European entities want to limit their collaboration to European actors, yes, then that project will be, in a sense, European. Or if a Chinese entity would limit the community a certain project to only Chinese actors, that would maybe classify as Chinese. But the power of open source is that you can scale collaboration, so you don't have to limit yourself in that essence. And I think that's really where the value comes from, and not thinking about the geopolitical aspects. That may be relevant in some cases, but in others, it's thinking open. That's typically when you achieve the most value. But again, this can be a very long discussion. I see your points, but I disagree.
Okay.
Thanks, Johan. Indeed, it can be a very long discussion, but your conclusion, it's like it's the most important thing here, because if we look at the geopolitical context, it influences every aspect of policy, and open source now it's part of digital policies in many countries. So there is an influence, but I tend to agree with Johan that open source does not have boundaries. Boundaries are set up by certain context, but it's an extra layer. But as a construct, as a notion, definitely there are no boundaries. So this can be a very long and scholastic discussion. So if the question is if there are other questions to Johan and related to his presentation.
There are questions in the chat that I see. There was a question from Stefan Zozel that was asking if there is an overview of how mature OSPOs are country by country across Europe.
So we did an initial brief overview or mapping in terms of this study, but that was in 2023, so 2 years ago, and that has expanded quite broadly. I would refer to the European or the Commission's OSPO network for a better overview, and they are currently working on creating a website and making the network more open. And I think they will provide a good overview of how OSPOs are emerging. But I can provide many more examples from after the study has evolved, that there are many good and very mature examples out there that we can point to on all levels.
Yes, so Johan's study was looking in detail and several OSPOs, but now we can hear more about it during Miguel's presentation, where he can mention how many members of public sector OSPOs network There are, I think there are 18 of them. So yes, as Johan said, there are more examples of quite mature OSPOs now. And the network is now working, and the Commission is working with the network on creating a website. It will be on Interoperable Europe portal, where we can see, all the network members. And the network is really for public sector OSPO. So why it's open to such entities? It's not open to any OSPOs, as you know. And from Johan's presentations, there are a lot of OSPO networks that actually gather also other organizations. Our network is focusing on public sector European OSPOs. Cindy, do we have more questions, or should we leave them to the session?
Yes, there is another question. I think we have time to take it. That was asking, can you speak to the changes that the Cyber Resilience Act is bringing? You mentioned 2 words. That is a new term defined by the EC, question mark.
Yes, I think this is interesting because, I mean, the CRA talks about manufacturers and stewards to, I don't know if we call it new roles, but in the context of open source, they come in, and stewards in talking about them. This brings an interesting discussion that I don't have the legal answer to, the legal interpretation, but I think it's an interesting concept, like what these association-based OSPOs, what role they are playing, because indeed they are bringing together and hosting and promoting open source projects on behalf of the public sector entities. So I think the mapping and the role of these associations or public sector stewards, if we can call them that, I think that's an interesting thing to discuss and talk more. And also when a public sector entity is a manufacturer or not. We had this discussion in the Swedish public sector, the Swedish OSPO network at the workshop earlier this year, where we had both industry and public sector OSPOs with a lot of good discussions. But again, that's a broader discussion. But I would definitely like to continue it.
Thank you, Johan. More questions from the chat?
No. Then, and if does anybody want to ask maybe a last question? We still have 3 minutes to take some questions for Johan. No? Okay, so otherwise we will move on to the next part of this.
Okay, yes, let's do it. So now it's time to hear from Miguel. So once again, thank you, Johan, for this great introduction to our more practical presentations on the practice in OSPOs. So now it's time to hear from Miguel about the EC OSPO and how it is driving open source adoption at the European Commission. You have already learned a bit from Johan's presentations. Now it's time for something more concrete and more detailed. Miguel is my colleague from the Interoperability and Digital Government Unit. He's the team lead of the Interoperability Enables an Open Source team. And in this team portfolio, the team is responsible for portfolio of initiatives that contribute to achieving interoperability in Europe. This includes the Interoperable Europe portal, key interoperability solutions such as CAMS, you might have heard of it, the Interoperability Testbed, and EIRA and eGovEIRA, and the Interoperable Europe Academy. OSOR and EC OSPO are also part of this portfolio, and I think this is the part Miguel is closest to with his heart. So Miguel, over to you.
Thanks, Monica. Do you hear us here in the room, Boris and I?
Yes, very well, thanks.
Okay, thanks. I mean, open source is actually what I started with in Commission, and this is what I'm going to talk about today. I will try to share my slides. If not, Cindy, you can try to help me, but give me just 1 minute. Do you see them?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you see the slides?
Yeah, we can see.
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, so yeah, my name is Miguel Diez. Already Monica did the introduction for me, and I will try in the next 10 minutes to give an overview of how is the EC OSPO working. And I already, you saw Johan already mentioned that we are an institution-centric OSPO, and I like what Johan said, that we are more like a liaison, and we have elements of external outreach that you will see in the coming slides. But as also Johan said, there is a link with the institution you belong to, and in our case, Commission, we come from a long journey where already Commission was step by step adopting open source already from the 2000s, where it was used in our data centers with some Linux servers, and then continually increasing. We had interim strategies internal to our own department, Digit, where I belong to, but it was not until 2020 when we came for an open source strategy for the entire Commission that the OSPO existed. It was created actually at that moment with that strategy, where the ultimate goal was to transform the organization. And Johan also mentioned change agent. I think this is how I like to see us, like driving change into organization for the adoption of open source principles and practices. So, and that's why we have transformed in that open source strategy that we did in 2020, and we were just showing that we are working on the new one, where we still need to see what would be the next step. And that strategy, the one in 2020, came with an action plan, and in the next 10 minutes I will try to show some of them, because at the end the actions that we do is what is defining us. And you will see that most of the elements that Johan mentioned, we will see them through these actions. So coming back to the role of OSPO, which was actually the first action of the strategy in 2020, which was the creation of an OSPO. So we have that institutional support, which is very good, by the way, to continue evolving. Liaison, I think this is one of the main characteristics of the role of the EC OSPO. We are the central body when it comes to open source matters. We are not a competency center, which was something Johan mentioned also in his presentation. We don't have the gurus in all open source topics, but we know which doors to knock when we need to help. So we are the custodians of the open source strategy, the one we created in 2020, and we will be the custodians of the new one we will do for 2026. We have this outreach element, so we are the phase when interacting with open source communities. You can see the OSPO network, which is something that came out from our initiative, and in the meantime I checked, and Heis told me that we have 18 members. So coming back to that question, and we are normally the executors of open source related projects when the Parliament has initiatives on this aspect, and we will show actually one of them. So, and now coming back to different, sorry. Do you see, okay, one of the things, the first things we did was to remove legal barriers. Before the strategy for our developers, it was very difficult. It was quite discouraging to go open source because they have to go through different steps, getting different validations. and that could take even up to 6 months for them to go open source. And then we introduced some policy changes, and one of them was that if you want to go to open source, now you don't have to do a commission decision, which was a step that we had to do at that time. And we removed that, and thanks to that, our teams, they publish open source much faster than before. And not only that, our developers, they were less constrained to say that they were working for open source projects. That was the case for Drupal, where we are major contributors, but nobody knew, because our developers, they didn't dare to say that they were contributing to Drupal in their free time or in the working time. And thanks to that, we gave the room to our developers to freely contribute to open source projects like Drupal. So just wanted to check something. Okay. The other action that you see, just wanted to check, you see the slide on open sourcing right now? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So another thing that we did is to come up with our own repository for open source projects. At that time, we didn't have the chance to have a platform to expose the code that we were doing, and we came with our own code repository, which is called code.europa.eu, where at I think that now we are getting close to 4,000 users, and we have important projects like Leos, which is a legal text editor. We also have Simple, which is an open source middleware for data spaces. You can check yourself directly, and you will see all the code that we have there. And the numbers are growing every month. So more and more we have projects that you can that we expose to the open source community. Another aspect that we, again, in this change management, right, we were also promoting encouraging our developers at least to share the code internally within the organization if they were not ready yet to go fully open source, but at least between projects to share the code internally in another code repository that we have. Because Digit, especially, we are a software machine, we can say. We produce thousands of lines of code every day, and it's a pity that at least internally, we cannot share those methods, those libraries, those applications, right? Because there is a lot to share between us. We started very low 4 years ago in 2020, only a bit more than 25% of our code was visible by other teams, and now we are getting, I think by that time we should be even close now to 40%, and our aim is that every year to increase until open your code internally for other teams is the norm rather than the exception. Another initiative that we brought as part of this strategy is the open source labs. We created a platform and a way coming with a governance that we allow other departments to propose open source solutions, test them, and if there is a proper business case, even to propose them to management and then incorporate it in our service portfolio. We did that for Jitsi, which is the tool we are using today for this session. And we had ongoing initiatives also with CritPad for collaboration tool and Discourse for forums. Johan mentioned the outreach, and we have been very active on that. We want to be close to open source communities, and we did that through organizing bug bounties to support well-known open source projects, but that we are consuming ourselves. We do consume Moodle, we do consume, in some cases, a Mastodon as well. And we did bug bounties for them. We have done hackathons with them. And as well, we have made internal events to promote the open source values and practices. Another important step, and actually, again, coming to the change management, we integrated open source elements in our IT governance tools. We all have our project management methodologies in our institutions. We all do have portfolio management, project management. So we work with these teams that from the start, when you have an IT project starting in your institution, you already ask yourself certain questions. Do we have open source solutions before buying a specific product? Are we planning to go open with the code that we are producing? So you see, I guess some of you know PM Squares. This is the project management methodology that we use internally at Commission, and we work with them to perform these changes. I mentioned at the beginning that we work with the Parliament, and they have great ideas. And when they have these ideas, they are looking for an executor to bring them to reality. And this is one of the examples, the European Open Source Solutions Catalog, where which you can visit, by the way, and perhaps we can put the link in the chat. It's an initiative that came to light in March this year, where we aggregate open source software developed by public administrations in a central place called the EU Open Source Solutions Catalog. At the moment, we are getting close to 700 solutions that are coming from these catalogs that you see in the screen. So Developers Italia, which was mentioned by Johan, Developer Overheid from the Netherlands, the French catalog, codegov.fr, ourselves via Code.eu. We are contributing to this catalog as well with solutions like Leos, and the Finnish catalog that for the moment is bringing X-Road into this catalog. So this will continue evolving, and we are very happy that it got a good reception. It was very welcome, and yeah, we invite you, we take the opportunity to invite you that if you're working for an institution that is producing software and you think there is potential for that software to be reused, please get in touch with us and see whether we can onboard you. I don't know how much time I was talking, but definitely what we did, and coming back to the impact for the organization that Johan was referring in his slides, we did see an impact, and of course you need to look at the things with perspective. It's not that we saw a dramatic change from day to night of the organization, but we saw elements, and that's why we have this little plant here where make us have this aha moment where the organization was changing. The organization, the entire commission now considers open source at the early stages of a project. The software we develop is becoming with better quality, more secure due to the fact of this transparency, where people can assess your code, help provide bug fixes, contribute to it. We start reusing. We had cases already in intra departments where they use the code produced by others. There is less resistance to go open thanks to these legal barriers that we removed. We start receiving third-party code contributions from the outside. So really, some of these projects that I showed before in Code.eu, we do have already issues that were raised, some bug fixes as well. We are even saving costs because, Code.eu is based on GitLab. And GitLab, they have this policy that if everything you publish there is open source, then you don't have to pay licenses for that. And then you are enjoying the latest version, which is the most advanced, which is GitLab Ultimate. And also, and something I didn't mention, we improve our compliance. The software we produce is more compliant in terms of license conflicts, because every time we go to Code.eu to publish our software, we do an internal check in terms of intellectual property. We have another department in the commission called the Joint Research Center. They do really look at your code, and they make sure that all the libraries that you're using, you are not in conflicts. that everything is okay and you can go ahead with your project. So bottom line, the open source strategy and the OSPO, of course, it had an effect. We see we saw all these signs that I'm putting in these slides, and because of that, we are pursuing these efforts in a new strategy that we plan to have ready in the beginning of 2026, I would say. And yeah, very motivated, very happy, and yeah, so this is what I wanted to share with you. And sorry if I took more time, I couldn't track it, but thanks. So over to you, Cindy, Monica.
Yes. So indeed, we have maybe time for one question, and I see one in the chat. So there is a question that says, in the catalog, are you tracking changes in the public code, .yml? For instance, it would be very interesting to see new public organizations being added to the used by field and which code bases are managing to get reused.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Indeed, the catalog is based on a metadata standard that we use to define open source software. It's called public code.yml, and indeed there is a field called used by, which is key for reuse because it shows you a specific software by whom is being used, and some institutions are using it. But we are not tracking, because I think the question was the changes. Well, there is a governance body and we want to improve it, that's for sure, because we think there is more juice that we can extract from public code.yml. For instance, specifically this field called used by, it's a free text where you can put whatever you want. It's good, it's not bad, but perhaps there are better ways to define this field. Boris is next to me because he was involved. So yeah, we will continue working. We want to improve it, but we do believe that public code.yml is a great standard to use for this. It's very agile, and that's one of the key successes of this catalog. So thanks for the question.
Maybe very quickly, we won't be able to take all the questions, but we can, we will have some time afterwards to maybe to tackle the other questions. But very quickly, maybe if you in 1 minute or a few sentences, someone is asking, do you know how much budget Commission is investing in our software versus in software development in general? And is there a specific goal to that share for the next 3 to 5 years?
No, fortunately, I don't have the answer to that. I can say, nevertheless, that the barrier was very low in the sense that indeed, Commission has an inertia of a lot of proprietary software that we had from the past. This is changing. We are more and more, when you go to the meeting rooms, to the corridors, Jitsi, Nextcloud is coming into these conversations, especially in this geopolitical context where digital sovereignty is becoming more and more relevant. But I do not have the answer. But what I can say is that still we have a lot of job to do in Commission in that respect.
Okay, and maybe quickly into words as well. What is the size and shape of the EC OSPO in terms of staff, numbers, and profiles?
Well, it's growing. At the beginning, we were very small. We were 2 FTEs, perhaps. Now I can say that we are, it's still not much, but I would say we are 1, 2, 3, 4. And if I count Monica, then 4.5, something like this, between 4 and 5. So yeah.
Thank you for counting me as half.
Maybe, so we are going to move on to our next speaker, but maybe if you can, get in the chat, someone is asking if we can share a quick link or info about the EC OSPO Bug Bounty program.
Yeah, well, it's not that we have a link. I need to check. We will check if we have something public. It's more internal. I think we have some articles in the portal, in the Interoperable Europe portal. Okay, I will try to get back to that.
I think we have articles about past bounties, and now there's a new program in preparation that will be launched in the coming months. So you just need to follow information on the Interoperable Europe portal. And of course, we will be publicize, each bounty and on social media and the portal. But it's in preparation. Okay, so now it's time for the presentation of Boris van Hoytema, who leads the Open Source Program Office at the Dutch Ministry of Interior and Kingdom Relations. His official title in Dutch is Kwartiermaker. You need to correct me. So it's coordinator of this OSPO. And he, of course, has extensive experience of open source, including his role at the Foundation of Public Code and many others. I will let him talk about it himself. So, Boris, please share with us your experience with the Dutch OSPO.
Yes, well, thank you very much, Monica, Cindy, all of the team here, and Miguel also for hosting me here today. I will continue with the stories. So first, I'm going to talk a bit about open source at the ministries I work for. I work for the ministries of the Interior and Kingdom Relations, our Internal Affairs Ministry, and the Ministry of Housing and Spatial Planning, and I run the OSPO there. As ministries, we publish over 783 repos. We publish them in our own developer catalog that is, of course, then also federated to the European one. And we do a whole bunch of things in our ministries. We publish a lot of components to things and a lot of connectors so that we're able to collaborate with other organizations on the pieces of software that connect our systems to their systems. We publish whole software things, standards, reference implementations for standards, a lot of experiments, and more we're also seeing policy being developed in open source. And we really want to do open source working. So not just open source software and not just using open source software, but really enabling to use all the processes also around open source to really achieve our strategic goals that we have as an organization. So our higher level strategic goals. And with that, we also want to be an example and enable other governments in the Netherlands to also really bring open source into the core of their execution. We have an open source strategy, just like the Commission, which has like sort of the hard factors, which are rules and having an OSPO and all the agreements and monitoring and all those kind of things you need. But also we think about the soft factors, and those are more like the stories you need to have going around in an organization to make open source something every day. The culture, the communications, the training, and all the innovation around it. And we, of course, also have a formal rule framework for open source. Sorry for just showing the screenshot here in Dutch. But basically, we have a framework that sort of takes software projects through the legal steps and the decision of should something be open source. Well, turns out that in most cases, legally, if you're starting a new software project in government in the Netherlands, you should be doing it in open source. And we try to help with that. Also, since last year, we're really seeing that the strategic autonomy discussion is flaring up. We had some research done by a Defense Research Institute, Klingendaal, and they identified 10 big strategic dependencies of the Netherlands and its government, of which one was office software, which really had some impact, and one of them is open source software in its own, where we have a bigger dependency on other countries in open source software than other countries have on us. And that requires us to react. So part of that we do with our OSPO, the OSPO of the Ministry of Interior Affairs, which was founded with the Communication to Parliament on Digital Commons 2 years ago. And there its mission was set out as, on one hand, the goal of the OSPO is to remove internal barriers and impediments around open source. That is really geared at this idea of like, we have all the rules that should make open source possible. So it is not about creating more rules. It is really about going into the organizations and figuring out, okay, what is stopping open source from happening, and how do we clear those barriers? And next to that, the collaboration will be sought by the OSPO with other OSPOs, public administrations, companies, and individual developers. So the OSPO is also the place of contact for the whole open source world with the ministry, and the other way around. So who is in the OSPO? The OSPO is part of our Chief Technology Officer cluster that we have inside of our Chief Information Officer directorate. The kwartiermaker, which is a very Dutch word indeed, and is the coordinator of the OSPO. A kwartiermaker is sort of the setter-upper or the founder, and we have a very small tech team that does innovations. We're looking to expand the OSPO, and we have a network within our organization. I saw Michel already, and there are many other people in our organizations that have some responsibility for open source, and that we try to enable. And then also, of course, a network outside. We also have policy people in our department who are not part of the OSPO, but who have the open source in their policy portfolio, and we're working together with them to also really build the Dutch national OSPO for the national government, which we do together. And so the day-to-day work of the OSPO is sort of fits into these three buckets. One is to really like service the organization, so to make sure that everything keeps going. One is to be a fixer, to solve the problems as they arise. And one is that institutional placemaker, the kwartiermaker, to really make sure that it also stays around for the long term. So both provide people with continuous services that they can rely on, as well as solving their immediate tactical or strategic problems, and creating institutional longevity for all of that. That looking through another axis, that means sort of doing these three buckets of topics. One is guarding the policy and the quality, making sure that open source really like works. One is supporting everything that's going on, connecting what's going on internally with each other, but also the internal world with the outside world, and facilitating through all kinds of mechanisms and tooling, as well as finally training and enthusing people. And so this first step is sort of like what you need to have done in order to make sure that open source doesn't go wrong in your organization. The second step is supporting the open source that is happening in your organization to be successful. And the third is sort of like working on that organizational transformation that you have as a whole, and to enable the whole organization to really move towards open source more. On a day-to-day basis, that means that I support teams doing open source with all kinds of things. People come to me with questions and ask for advice. Very often things are like, am I allowed to do this? Or could you, and then I can write them an email saying like, yes, this is actually our policy and you are supposed to do this, not just allowed to do this. And then they can go and talk to their boss and say like, oh, I have this email, so this is what we should be doing. Or they ask for giving their bosses maybe a presentation, things like that. We help identify and mitigate risks. We take responsibility a lot. That can also really be an enabler in highly institutional organizations. If you say, well, you're going to publish this open source, and for the publishing of it, we'll take the responsibility for that. That really takes a lot of barriers away. We monitor the open source, and we're working on setting up also a code platform like the Commission has for Dutch governments as well. And of course, we maintain that contact with other governments, but also vendors and developers. So we also try to help the market of vendors that we really need in order to deliver us the open source that we need according to our strategy to be in the position where they can sell to us effectively. The IT vendor landscape is not always an easy one for changing with our strategic needs, so we try to help them a bit there as well. Then I want to highlight some things that we've done as well. We organized a leadership talk last year where we invited 130 director level people from all of the public sector and education sector in the Netherlands to talk to each other about open source, to really show them that they are not alone in their ambitions around open source and that they have other people in leadership positions that are also wanting to do this, and enabling them to think open source and collaborate. This has been very successful, and we've seen a lot of movement in the whole landscape through this. So that's something that I can recommend to all other OSPOs as well. We also took key people from our department to the OSOR event 2 years ago, which thank you again for organizing it. That has been really instrumental in a lot of the civil workers in our organization to really trust that both open source is a mature landscape to operate in, as well as see that it's important to keep that eye on the international collaboration, and that open source should not be done in isolation. And finally, we also have a community, which is a bit like the Interoperable Europe community, but then for the Dutch world, where we have blogs by community members, discuss things, etc., and have events. And finally, we support, of course, getting more jobs to be open source and making sure that when someone wants to do open source, that there's always work for you in national government. So this is our national job portal where you can search for open source jobs. With that, I would like to call on everyone to collaborate together, and let's make open source the default for software in European public administrations. Yeah, that's me. If you have any questions, I'd love to hear if there's more time. And otherwise, you can find me at this email address.
Thanks a lot, Boris. Yes, thanks for reminding us about your great initiative, bringing a lot of your colleagues for the OSOR event. We are very happy to see so many of you there, and I'm also really delighted that our work at OSOR, including this anniversary event, helps you to achieve your goals and in promoting, open source among your colleagues in the Dutch public administration. So a good example of how our work actually contributes to your goals. And yeah, the call for collaboration, we will hear about it more. And it's not about the collaboration within the European Public Services OSPO network, but in general. So now the time for questions. In the meantime, I will provide a link to the Interoperable Europe community, which I promised earlier, so we don't lose it. So yes, Cindy, do we start with questions from the chat?
Yes, we had one question from Paolo Vecchi, who is asking if the report about the Netherlands' dependency on proprietary software is available publicly?
It is. The report is available publicly, as well as our national government strategy that we published afterwards. The strategy is called the DOSA strategy. The report, I don't remember its name. It's linked there, but I'll try and find it in a bit, and then I'll paste it in the chat.
Great. Any other question for Boris? Okay, what's your email? Okay. I think you can provide that information, and we will, in the presentation as well, there will be contact to the speakers. Well, you were very quick to answer. Okay, so since we are not in advance, I suggest moving on to the next speaker.
Yes, let's do it. So thanks to Miguel and Boris, we were able to take a closer look at examples of institution-centric OSPOs and national government OSPOs. Now it's time to explore the world of academic OSPOs, another archetype presented by Johan Linåker. And we will be doing this with our next speaker, Clare Dillon, who is a PhD researcher and the community lead of the Community for Universities and Research Institutions Open Source Program Offices, CURIOSS for short. Clare, please, our virtual floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Monica, and thank you, everyone. I'm hoping you can see my slides. Please shout now if you can't. But I can't see your faces, so hopefully this will all work well. So as you've heard from the introduction, I am the community lead for the Community for University and Research Institution OSPOs. I'm also a PhD researcher, and my topic of research is inner source. So it was wonderful to hear about that progress from the European Commission OSPO as well, from the inner source perspective. But I'm here to talk about that particular archetype that Johan covered around academic OSPOs, which in and of itself, I think, is a relatively new emergent type of organization within universities and research institutions. And as Johan described, this idea of open source program offices has been around in the corporate sector for a very long time now, and has been emergent in various different shapes and forms in public sector organizations over the past number of years. The idea of an open source program office in academia is, I suppose, a relatively new idea when it's called an OSPO, but I would like to point out that, of course, there have been for many years OSPO-like activities that have been in place in many universities and research institutions. But if we want to take a look at, I suppose, the different potential goals of an academic OSPO, they often can be, well, whereas they have many things in common with what Boris described in terms of removing blockers and scaling services and supports that work in order to build capacity around open source, their very specific goals may differ. And these are some of them. So for academic OSPOs, oftentimes there is a broader goal for just open source excellence, potentially in the context of open science or open research, which may indeed be a national or indeed an institutional strategy. So oftentimes there is a broader just goal for the context of open source, or sorry, for the excellence in open source in that context. And some of the types of activities might be, for example, open source license guidance, which is indeed common with many other OSPOs. But that university context may often be different. As an example, some of the folks that we work with in the US pointed out that whereas you might have an institutional or an organizational policy around open source in either a corporate or other organizational context where you can dictate what is done, oftentimes with academic freedoms in a university context or an academic context, you may not have the same control over what individuals associated with your institution does. So sometimes that takes a different form. Oftentimes as well, academic OSPOs are concerned with research impact. So we do see some of those OSPOs turn up in their technology transfer offices, which are often responsible for managing the IP and IP transfer and spin-outs from a university. So that can often be one of the goals, the commercial impact of the IP developed within a university, but then also even in terms of the social impact, or indeed even research impact, but the many different ways in which open source software as a research output can have impact for those organizations that create it, or the institutions that create it. Another potential goal is the broader skills and education goal. Again, not for that institution, but for the broader workforce. So, of course, as we think about undergraduate students, both in technology courses, things like computer science, but also more increasingly across multiple different disciplines, say bioinformatics or other disciplines like that, then we're thinking about how open source skills can be embedded into curricula in order to be able to skill up the next generation of technology workers, and indeed have that excellence that we talked about earlier in research. And that may take the form of, for example, student programs as well as curriculum development, for example, internship programs or hackathons. And then operations and outreach. So Boris again referred to this idea of making sure that the OSPO itself runs well, is sustainable, is funded, thinking about the hiring or the management of folks that were within the OSPO. That is, of course, an important element to it. And indeed, the outreach, both internally across various different departments or within the university leadership groups, but also to the broader open source ecosystem, is often a goal of academic OSPOs. And as Monica mentioned, CURIOSS is a community for individuals who work in OSPOs in the academic context, or OSPO-like organizations. So they are for folks that are, whose role it is, official role it is, to work in these areas. And it was set up in 2023 with the support of a grant from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, to whom we're very grateful indeed. The organization itself, the community itself, now has over 50 members who represent about 24 different academic institutions. At the moment, there are about 6 of those based in Europe, and the rest are in the US. And we are growing now, not just for folks that have official OSPOs, but as I mentioned before, oftentimes, and this is particularly, I suppose, relevant for the European context, we're finding people who are engaged in what we would deem to be OSPO activities, but they may not call themselves an OSPO. Possibly they may have been set up within the context of an open science office or an open research enablement group, but they are effectively doing the work of an OSPO in that context. And as you've heard many times before, no two OSPOs are the same. They may sit in various different places. These are some of the places that we have examples of OSPOs sitting in. And indeed, as I mentioned, they may not even be called an OSPO, but oftentimes where an OSPO sits can actually inform the goals and the activities of what happens in that academic OSPO. So for example, if they sit in a technology transfer office, they may be more concerned with license advice, helping the commercialization of open source projects into commercial organizations. Whereas if they sit in, for example, central IT, or indeed maybe high performance computing center or research center, they may be more inclined to be working on the infrastructure that can support researchers to technically support their work. The goals of our community itself is really just about dedicated spaces for shared learning, allowing people to share, adapt, and co-create resources and tools that are relevant to OSPOs. We want to promote the awareness of academic OSPOs, and we want to partner and collaborate with other organizations and related communities. So I will just share some of these links, and I can put them in the chat later, just around some of the CURIOSS resources, which are oftentimes actually things we have curated from other parts of the ecosystem. Or some are created or co-created by the CURIOSS members themselves. We have started a patrons practice where we're outlining some of the work that's happening in these academic OSPOs, and we have some deep dives with folks in the CURIOSS ecosystem where they're speaking about something that might be particularly relevant to folks in this space. And this is an exploration of the academic OSPO activities. There is an article that's available at that very small DOI link there. There's an ODA link down at the bottom of the slides, but I know these slides will be shared with you. But they look at these various different 8 types of activities that academic OSPOs engage in. Some will be familiar to folks that may be in OSPOs in other contexts, like, for example, developing and sharing best practices. But some are, or for example, advocacy and policy, but some are perhaps very particular to that academic context, like, for example, working on funding proposals for academic funders, for example, educational efforts or curriculum development for undergraduate courses, or indeed even the community building takes a very different shape in academic institutions, because you may be building horizontal communities for everyone who's interested in open source, but you may also be thinking about community development around a very particular project in a very niche domain, say, for example, life sciences, bioinformatics. Someone gave the example of pharmaceutical research on on foreign bodies, like different planets, and I was kind of, that was a very niche area, but of course these communities all have different sizes and shapes, and some of the work is about how to actually do that best in the given context. So that's it from my presentation. Thank you very much, and I will stop sharing and hopefully be able to answer some questions. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Claire. Great presentation, as the other ones too, but really enjoy it and learn about CURIOSS, because I remember, from the time of our cooperation, your involvement in Lero. So it really looks impressive and getting more and more structured, the work you're doing. So congratulations. So questions to Claire, please.
Yes, so we have a first question from Yves Alexis, who is asking Claire, how are the relations with the technology transfer offices? Sometimes publishing as open source might be against transfer policies, managing or selling PI.
Thank you for that question. And I will say it's a common one, and it's very much dependent on the institution or the culture of given organizations. So when we first started this work, I met many people who would have considered some folks in the technology transfer offices or TTOs perhaps to be anti-open source, or perhaps leaning in a different direction. However, we have met many folks that are sitting in TTO offices who are very supportive of the open source research and see it as a natural and inevitable consequence of the moves towards open research practices, where, by the way, there are national, international, EU policies which are pointing researchers to deliver their research as open source outputs. And indeed, that makes it often easier for collaborations and consortia, either across universities and or with private sector partners. So the TTO offices are now seeing that this is an additional pathway for economic impact for IP that might be generated within their universities. And indeed, they really need to deal with it, even if it isn't traditionally in their goals for example, IP license, numbers of IP licenses that they would contract. However, many of them are concerned and want to enable as many startups or spin-outs of university research that are based on university research as possible, so you get an alignment there of goals. So I would say it very much depends on the culture, but we absolutely have seen a rise in the number of TTO officers who are very supportive and indeed looking to enable open source research outputs being translated into commercial offerings.
Yves Alexis says, thank you very much. So now we have also a second question. So we're asking you, do you have examples of courses created in relations to open source? So they're looking for ideas to promote the local uni.
So the great thing, of course, about working in this area is that folks that are creating curricula around open source often open source their curricula. So so yes, I would say there's many different courses available. They tend to move from the courses that are kind of about technical enablement, learning about what open source is, learning about how to engage with the open source ecosystem, learning how to set up your Git account, all of those sorts of things, right through to this idea of open source licensing, maybe, you know, how commercial organizations can work with open source, and very many types of courses, community management. So there's quite a wide range. They tend to be around the place. There's, like, for example, the Carpentries is an excellent organization for some of this material, but there are many different curricula that are based around the place. So if someone, whoever that might be, might like to reach out to me about what they are looking for, I can help point them in the right direction. Yeah, that's so yes, there's lots of curricula, and a lot of it is shared, which is great.
Thank you very much.
And a last question, maybe for you, Claire. So it's from Lars Kesau. I'm really sorry if I'm butchering your name. So that person is saying that it was interesting to hear about CURIOSS, and they have been involved in FLOSS projects for a long time and never heard about CURIOSS. So how does your community work, and are there regular meetings?
Yeah, so I mean, CURIOSS is still relatively new. Some of you actually may be familiar with OSPO++ as an organization. I was involved in that back since 2020, and we were looking at OSPOs in public sector organizations. And I would say CURIOSS kind of evolved from that with that specific focus on the academic context. But I will say that when we first formed in 2023, it was in response to Alfred P. Sloan Foundation funding a number of OSPOs in the US. So at the beginning, it was a coordination. I'll have to get Boris's word for that orchestration role, but it was that kind of coordination role for those OSPOs to help them learn together. But more recently, we have expanded. I will say it's not the community itself. It wouldn't be for everyone involved in FLOSS or open source projects in academia, because there are so many communities that are so involved in that area that talk about those broader, like many issues around excellence. This is very specifically for folks who are working in enabling and institutionalizing those skills and these programs at an institution level where there is institution support for that. So we are also very involved, of course, with things like the CHAOSS community, and there are working groups within the CHAOSS community looking at, for example, measuring the impact of open source in academia. There's a university working group around that. There's other work that's going on in Sustain open source community, the Sustain OSS community, and we do work there to map the landscape in open source in academia. So and then there's the Research Software Alliance that does a lot of work on the infrastructure that supports open research and things like that. So I would say there's loads of communities in this space, yeah, happy to follow up though and see if CURIOSS might be one for you.
Amazing. So that was our last question from the chat. So I think, and we are right on time to move to our panel session. So I will leave it to you, Monica.
Yes. So now we have some questions to all our guest speakers and now panelists. But please also think about questions to them, and I hope this discussion will be not only between our guest speakers, but you will get involved. So I have a first question. Sounds very standard, but it's not that easy to answer, because from your experience, and starting first with our practitioners, what are the key success factors to set up an OSPO and to run it successfully, and what advice you would give to public organization considering setting up an OSPO? Because your presentations were very inspirational, and you provided a lot of examples, but if you are to think about really essential elements that can ensure the success of setting up an OSPO and then running it, and then the same question to Johan, as from the researcher point of view and your analysis and studies that you conducted. So Claire, of course, we are considering academic OSPO, that they belong also to the public sector. They are a bit different, but as mentioned not once, they share a lot of commonalities. So what is your view? What is the really key essential factor?
Well, from my perspective, and I think this maybe shines through all the presentations today, I think aligning to the goals of the organization that you are working in or trying to enable is so important. There is, of course, a benefit in having consistent approaches across a number of different types of OSPOs and to enable shared learning and potentially even shared tools and infrastructure. But I would say that everyone is in a different place. Every organization is in a different place in their own open source journey. And so it's really critical, both in order to be able to have any impact at all, but also to be able to justify a sustained investment in what is essentially an enabling function, is to look at the context you're operating in and make sure that, as Boris pointed out, that you're addressing any blockers that may exist that are specific to that organization, and indeed looking for what you amplify as having maximum impact again for that organization. So I would say they're critical factors.
Okay, thanks a lot. Boris, your take on this.
Yes, no, I think Claire is absolutely right. What I would like to add to that is that I think it is very important to take your culture seriously. And especially in public administration, we often pretend that things are organized very much around hierarchies and predictable processes. But our organizations are often also very old organizations, which mean that they have very strong cultural context going on as well. And something that I have definitely seen a lot in the Netherlands is that the open source work that is successful is the open source work that really looks at the environment that exists specifically in that place, and then finds out like what are both the strategic goals and achievements that you're trying to achieve, but also what are the cultural hooks, what are the existing cultural processes that we might not even really talk about, but that are really there, and finding a way to embed yourself also in that. So if you have a very centralized government, that means that you need to act also very differently than when you have a very decentralized government or when you have a very federalized government. And so really look at the way that people are dealing with problems, not just formally, but also informally, and find the hooks to open source and to enabling lasting change in that.
Great. So it's actually linked, the organizational context mentioned by Claire and cultural aspects. They go together. So and also we can also probably think about, it's not a question to me, but I can add about a mindset of individual, members of your community or your organization. It's the same important. So what would you add to those two factors, Miguel?
Yeah. So yeah, in addition to these two that I fully agree, the alignment of the goals and the culture. And by the way, the alignment of the goals, just to elaborate on what Claire said, if in our strategy we would have put the focus a lot into procurement or things like that, for sure that the strategy would have not flagged. And so I think it's very important that indeed you put the focus on the things that were the organization with this goal alignment. But in addition to that, I think you need management support. Obviously, I mean, you cannot go solo with this, and you need to make sure that you have the right managers supporting and take the time to explain the benefits and why we should do this. And a second one that I would like to add is more the officializing the OSPO. Try to find a way, once you have your OSPO set up, to make it like endorsed by, in our case, we had this commission decision, because many times we are driven by political changes, and those things could come and go easily. But if you have something on legally on paper that ensures your survival, let's say, I think that's a very important thing to have with you.
So those two things, formalizing OSPO and having management support, actually are linked to each other and influence each other, no matter which happens first. So they are equally important and linked to each other. So I would like to add one more point before I ask Johan about his opinion, because there was something about training courses mentioned earlier. I think also, this cultural aspect and especially the individual mindset, but it's also about the knowledge, the capabilities of the people involved in setting up an OSPO, but also the whole environment. And here we are coming with some help because OSOR is going to publish soon 3 courses on open source for public sector actors. They will be published on Interoperable Europe Academy. And we are also publishing soon a new version of OSOR Handbook that is touching upon many aspects of open source in the public sector. So this is something that I want to announce now. And Johan, your opinion, what is the element that is missing and not mentioned by our speakers, or what was the most striking element that you think that would contribute to successful setup of OSPO?
I mean, everything mentioned, I was thinking of many of them, but just I was my first mind was in a mandate, like the need for policy support, because OSPOs are a change agent, as I mentioned. It's about doing organizational, cultural change. It's talking about people. So having mandate from above is crucial if you want anything to happen. But since that was mentioned, I would like to highlight also finding your place in the ecosystem. Like, how does the open source ecosystem look in your context? Because I mean, it's not about working in isolation, it's about collaborating and growing common capabilities. So what other organizations are doing similar things? Where are the touch points? OSPOs can be described as interfaces between the different organizations in open source matters. So finding these collaborators that have common goals, where you can collaborate on either technology or different organizational aspects, whatever is needed, either nationally, locally, or internationally. So I think that's also important.
Okay, thanks. So I think there are other elements, but we really focused on the essential ones. So we have one more question at this part of the session for to all of you. And then we will move to the questions from the audience. So Edwish, you have one question to our speakers.
Yes, so our second question is, do you measure the impact of your OSPO? And if so, how? And maybe we can start with you, Johan, we can continue with you.
Who wants to start about the measuring of the impact?
I can start. My answer would be we try, because at the end, this is, of course, I mentioned the officialization is something important, but delivering results is equally important, if not more. And we try to track that, for instance, in our repository of open source projects, the number of projects, the number of users that we have. Actually, they are part of, let's say, our management plan for DIGIT is something we are tracking. Then, as regards for the open source solutions catalog, we are tracking the number of catalogs we are onboarding, the number of solutions. For inner sourcing as well, as you saw in the slides, right? We try to show how many repos in our internal repositories are being open to the rest. We would like to trace contributions and reuse cases, and this is for our next phase, what we are trying to see whether we can have some data It's easy to share, as we normally say, but when it comes to reusing or contributions, it's where we have more difficulties, and this is what we are trying to work on.
Maybe Boris, you can add about your perspective on that.
Yes, I think with the mandate that our OSPO has to remove the impediments and barriers, we have kind of chosen not to really look at the numbers as much. We do, of course, but it only says so much. We are really focused on sort of how many of our strategic goals are we trying to achieve using open source. So that is for us the most important metric of success, is that we are actually really using open source as a tool to achieve our strategic goals. So if we have very large procurements, for instance, that we make open source an integral part of, like, that is the kind of success that we're looking at. Or when we're able to successfully use open source in order to enable better communication around a sensitive project with citizens on, that is the kind of successes that we're really looking at. And that's very qualitative, and we realize that, but we also feel that the qualitative approach to looking at success really fits the mandate of removing barriers and impediments. We believe that we need to make sure that open source is institutionalized for the long term, because we believe that there is going to be different reasons to do open source all the time, but it is our role to really make sure that the long term is there. So when I was hired, it was all about transparency. Then for a while, it was all about effectivity, and now it's all about autonomy. But during all of that, we need to keep building those capabilities. We do that with qualitative reporting mostly.
Okay, thank you, Boris. But I'm curious if, because I understand why you are going for a qualitative approach, but what I observe, it's a rather a push from the management usually for quantitative approach. Miguel was mentioning some let's say KPIs you can look at. Do you experience the same?
Yeah, so smart metrics are, I think, universal in public administrations. And we have tried tracking some of those things for a while, but we have also made the argument that those metrics don't say that much. So in my presentation earlier, I showed you a metric, which is the amount of repositories that are published by our ministries. And that is a impressive metric, but of course, it is very, well, it doesn't say that much, because there are organizations that publish a lot, but there are many small experiments that don't really have big impacts. And then there are organizations that publish almost nothing, but it's very core and to their strategy and what they're achieving. And so we are in the lucky position that through our place in the hierarchy, we might not need to really use those kind of metrics to convince our leadership. We are part of the CIO office, which is very much an office that is about making sure technology goes right. And that also gives us space to really talk more about the core of the problems. And with that, we have the ability to talk a bit less about the numbers and the quantitative measures. I'm hoping that with maturity, it will be more possible to use qualitative measures as well. But open source is a very diverse and very, let's say, messy landscape. And no two open source projects are the same. No two goals of open source projects are the same. And the open source is really a way of working. And that way of working can be applied to a lot of different projects, not just software projects, but for instance, we are having policy development happen in open source as well, and it is really hard to compare those in a quantitative way.
Okay, thanks a lot. It's actually very useful justification for some of us when we are asked for quantitative, proofs of the impact of open source. So I think it can serve as a very good inspiration for some of us present today. So thanks a lot. Johan, anything to add from your observations?
No, and just as Boris said, finding the right numbers is difficult, and they can easily be misinterpreted or gamed or whatever. There needs to be a balance both between quant and qualitative to communicate the impact. And just to add that in industry where organizations have been working with open source for much longer periods, it's typically the public sector, they don't have this either in place. There are attempts here and there, but there's a lot of work needing here to mature as well. And just to highlight the CHAOSS community health analytics for open source software is a good place to go about and find different metrics and engage in discussions on this.
Indeed. Thank you. So now it's time for our participants to shoot their questions.
Yes, so there was a question from Andre that was asking, are OSPOs good contact points for large municipalities who may want to fully step over from proprietary office software to fully open source software? Who could answer, Andre?
I can take a stab. This fully depends on your context, but because OSPOs almost always have the role of connecting, it means that they almost always have a network, which means that if you are looking for the right person to ask this question, your local OSPO or the OSPO of your government can probably help you find those people. And I think that is the most important thing here. So my answer would be yes.
Anyone else want to complete?
No, I agree with what Boris said. I think it's the starting point, and yes, my answer would be yes as well.
I think Andre likes your answer. So we have time maybe for one last question. So if anybody wants to take, to shoot their question, it's the time. Either in the chat or you can also open your mic.
I think that some of us are already, thinking about lunch. It's time. It's been 2 hours, very well spent. So thanks a lot to our speakers. Great presentations. I hope that they will serve as an inspiration for all those that want to push for OSPOs or any type of unit entity that has a OSPO-like function, so can help govern, manage, and serve for the purpose of adopting open source in their organizations, and to smooth the process, get rid of the barriers, and really contribute to the digitalization of public services in a proper way using open source. We will publish the presentations and the recording. Recording will be on YouTube or PeerTube. We'll see how it goes. But the report from this event of today will be published, of course, on OSOR. So once again, I encourage you to become a member. You can read our content without becoming a member, but there are some benefits of joining our community, subscribing to the newsletter. We are planning, and there was already at least one event announced. that will focus on the aspect of funding of open source in the public sector. So you are encouraged to register and join us. I think it's in June.
Yes, 30th of June.
Yes. So I hope to see you all in the next event, and there will be more coming. So just follow us on OSOR to stay updated about all the events and publications. So as I mentioned earlier, the study will be finally published in the coming weeks, and there are new studies also coming. The same author, one of them, Johan, put together a study on other aspects of open source, now looking at the local administrations. So that one will be published in the coming months. Anything to add that we should announce today, Cindy, Clare, Dish?
No, I don't think so.
No, I think just perhaps to invite to first of all thank again all of the speakers and the audience, and then to invite anyone who is not yet subscribed to our newsletter to do so, and then they will have all of the information about upcoming events and the content that is regularly published on OSOR, including the study on OSPOs that will be, as announced, published in the coming months.
Okay, so perfect. It's 12. Thank you very much to you all, and a special big thanks to Claire, Boris, Miguel, and Johan for your time and sharing your insights with us. Great presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.